This is how we used to troop around back in the days with jackets on. All these people around, just walking around, jackets, racking shit, fly head to toe, looking like Power Rangers and shit. This is how we used to be done.
When I left San Francisco in '96, there was like really hardcore police crackdowns, and sort of like there was like a whole like graph department or area that was like looking for people. I mean, I know that Josh really got it bad, and they were like after people in a really bad way. And so I sort of was out before that time happened. And I mean, it would have really sucked, I think, to sort of like try and do graph in that environment. 'Cause yeah, I mean, cops suck, but, you know, it's not like fun to be out there and like being chased by cops. It's like, you know, a nightmare. But, it was definitely before that time period, it was like super easy to just go out and like go in the tunnels and like climb buildings. And there was just sort of like not much happening, to sort of stop that. I mean, it was definitely like kids wanted to, you know, express themselves, and I think we certainly did. Yeah, in many different ways. There was a lot of like different sort of like artist spaces also that were happening. It was just sort of a very rich time period. Yeah, and it wasn't sort of like so destitute now as it is in terms of like zombie. It wasn't sort of like that dark, you know, sort of like atmosphere it sort of has. I think it's sort of ending, but yeah, it definitely was a more creative place. Maybe.
How did the pre-internet aspect of it and like now we have, it's like hyper cell phone use, hyper internet use, hyper media, but then it's like it wasn't like that at that time period. How do you think that affected your life when you're writing graffiti and you're painting and you're doing all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's super different now. I mean, I don't even know. It's like people don't even have to, it doesn't even seem like they have to go bombing. I mean, it's like you can just paint on a wall and take a photo of it and put it on your phone, and that's like enough. I mean, it's crazy. It's also super crazy to me how commercialized graph is now. It's like, wow, there's like so much branding. I mean, it's across the board anyhow, but it's just like, it's really just sort of like anything else now. I mean, it's like Starbucks, you know, it's just like crazy how sort of like watered down things are. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not like, oh, back in the day, but I mean, it's not so much like that, but it's like, wow, you really had to work at it to sort of like keep that like image alive. I mean, it was definitely like you had to fucking take your camera the next morning and like go out on the street and like go back to where you painted and take a picture of it because it was going to get buffed. And the only way you could prove that you were bombing really is if you were like taking photos of your stuff. You know what I mean? It's like no one's going to see it if it gets buffed. And so to sort of like keep that sort of image or what have you, or prove that you were out there doing something, if you're sort of hitting specific places, you know they're going to get buffed. And so it's like you're going to have to like take a photo of it, you know, to show anyone or to prove that you were there or up or what have you. And so I feel like there was a little bit more work involved. Also, it's like I said, I mean, people were actually like, you know, going and bombing, you know what I mean? Going and like going to a neighborhood. I mean, it was very, sort of like, what is it? Sort of, it was like neighborhood by neighborhood. I mean, you could go out on the street and you would sort of like hit a specific area and you could see who else was out. And it was like, I mean, it was a really small group of people that were writing on the street. And so you could sort of like know who was out. And it was just a really small sort of like scene. But it made it kind of like fun. And it was kind of like, I think that maybe all graph writing is this way, but it's sort of like a language that you share with other writers. You know what I mean? It sort of is like, when you're writing graph, it's not really for the public. I mean, you'd think that it would be because it's such a public, you're in such a public space, you know what I mean? Like people are out, they're on buses, they're in cars, and they're seeing graph. But I feel like when you're writing graph as a writer, you're really just writing for other writers, you know what I mean? So It's like super insular to some extent. And I don't think people really sort of, I don't know if they really realize that or feel that way now with so much sort of like social media or what have you, or in terms of like, I think I'm talking specifically about like being in the city and being in places and being in neighborhoods. And it's sort of like, it involves more so like the physical area of a city also. It's not so much, you know, it's sort of like where people are and what people are doing. It seems so much to be so much about that, at least for me. Yeah, but I don't even know how it, I mean, and also like pre-internet, it was sort of like you would hear about another writer coming to town like way before they arrived, just from like hearsay. Like it was sort of like, oh, so-and-so are coming to town from like another city, or like someone from like AWR is coming from LA, or like someone from Boston is coming, or like, you know what I mean? It was sort of like everyone would get all like crazy for a minute. So it was definitely more special, I feel. And you wouldn't really see so much, or, you know, there was people that were from, it's kind of like, I don't even know if it's like that nowadays, but it was sort of like writers wrote in specific ways from where they came from, whether they're from Philadelphia or Boston or what have you. But it was like, it was just definitely sort of more exciting or fun to have people from out of town or go to other places. I mean, Josh and I tried to go to like Canada, but we got like turned away at the border with like 500 cans of paint in our car. It was sort of like, you know, and there was other writers that we'd stop and see in Seattle or what have you. But it was sort of like exciting or a little like sketchy almost to go to different places. Whereas I feel like people have access to like, obviously we have access to like the entire world now. Yeah. And, you know, it was like, I guess back then it was a little bit more thrilling to sort of like, it was sort of like a frontier still.
It's crazy too, like that time period, the people involved, like you're talking about KR, you're talking about Twist, mm-hmm. and AMAZE, how much influence that ended up having throughout the world to this day.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of surprising to me too. I mean, it definitely, I think that maybe it was because it was so insular. I mean, it really was like a really small group of people, but also because we sort of were coming from so many different places. You know, like I said, like Craig was so much about New York, and like Barry and I were so much about like the Bay Area and California, and like other people from like specific places in the Bay Area and like Daly City and the Peninsula and the East Bay. And it was just really sort of this melting pot of like different things going on. But it definitely didn't seem super different. I mean, I think the history of San Francisco and the creative history, like the beat movement happened there, and a lot of underground movements happened there, and like the Castro and like the gay and lesbian scene, and like it was just super, you know, it was like very different in terms of like, it was not like traditional graph, you know, like I was dating a girl, my friend, like my friend Alicia and I were dating for a while. It was like all different kinds of people were like doing graph on the street, you know what I mean? Like all different walks of life. And it was really, I feel, because of San Francisco and like the sort of like the city and how it like brought creative people there already, and the history of that. But yeah, I have no idea why or how it became like so popular. But it's definitely, it was a really like sort of amazing time period. I mean, there was a whole bunch of aspects of graph that I really hated too. It was like, you know, a lot of the beef and like all the sort of like drama, which is like afterwards, it's like, what the fuck was that? It was like so stupid, you know, but I mean, it's like so ridiculous. And like so much like shoplifting, like I hate, like at the end, I just wanted to like stop doing graph because I hated, like I couldn't like shoplift anymore really. It was like so stressful, but it's like you had to steal everything, and it was just like so annoying. It was like, at some point it's like I couldn't even like buy shampoo. You know what I mean? It was just like everything. It was just like so stressful. So there's like elements of graph that, you know, infiltrated other elements of your life, and it was just like too much, you know, at the end of the day. It was like I didn't want to like steal things anymore. And I mean, there's just like a lot of different parts of it that was sort of annoying for sure. But I mean, it definitely had its like high points. I mean, also you have to think that like we all went to art school almost, you know what I mean? Like Barry did, Craig did, I did, you know, we were all at the Art Institute at some point or another. And so it was, and Alicia did, my friend, it was sort of like many people of that time period were actually at art school, which is sort of like, adds a whole other element to like what traditional graph is, you know, to some extent. It was sort of like we got super creative with it, so to speak. But yeah, it was fun. I think we were just really down to do all sorts of different things too. And I mean, it wasn't just like doing pieces. Like I never like there was a place called Psycho City or whatever. It was sort of like strict traditional graph of like piecing and like hitting trains and sort of like having this element of what traditional graph was like super uninteresting to me. You know what I mean? Like I wanted sort of like a relationship with the city itself. And I mean, also, so tagging, but I mean, San Francisco has like a really big sort of like bus tagging sort of culture. And that was really more so about like kids taking buses and sort of like that element. And it was like on the street also. And there was like old riders that people knew about, like UB40 or what have you. But it was sort of like very much so, the streets were super clean, I felt like, aside from like weird like scribbling and what have you. It was sort of like an empty canvas at you know, at the point when we started really hitting it. And then like more and more writers started coming. But aside from like just sort of like traditional tagging, there was like no fills, no throw ups, and like pieces were really only done in like Psycho City. It was sort of like really kind of not lame in terms of, I mean, Psycho City was like annoying as hell. You know what I mean? Like it was somewhere I would never be caught dead in, you know? It was just like way uncool. But yeah, what else?
What was the experience like for you shoplifting and getting into that through the graffiti avenue of like, this is the culture, this is what we do, this is how we source our paint, but also we might do it for food, we might do it for jackets, we might do it for eventually like we're gonna try to pay for nothing.
Oh yeah, that was like a real mentality. Yeah, like insurance fraud, just sort of like whatever you can do. It became a real hang up in the end because it was just, not only was it stressful to some extent, but it was sort of like, yeah, but I mean, yeah, we would go out of the city to we called it racking. You know, you'd go out of the city and you would like team up with someone, you would have a bag or backpacks or what have you, and it was like a totally like easy thing to do. Like there was no cameras, like old dudes in paint stores, they weren't paying attention, like they didn't know what we were doing. And so you just like fill up literally like bags of paint, or you would like buy shit, return it, you know, get cash. It was just like super wide open. Or I mean, like steal it. Sorry, you'd steal it and then return it without a receipt, and then you get cash. Like just things like that were happening all the time. But like super simple, not like huge sums of money or anything like that, but just sort of like getting by on the everyday was like a big part of my life. And then yeah, I mean, definitely going out of the city and just like, you know, filling each other's backpacks with paint was like a everyday thing. And markers, you know, you'd go to like office supply. I mean, because like the stores also back in the day, there was like no online shopping. So stores were like filled with all sorts of stuff, like huge array of things that people nowadays, they don't even realize like how like there was just so much different stuff in stores back then that you don't see nowadays. Like in terms of like office supplies or art supply stores or sort of stationery stores. It was like where we got all of our markers and mops, or what we were gonna make into mops. Yeah, and it was all like run by elderly people that like weren't paying attention. So we would just like steal all their stuff. But and just sort of like every day. I mean, terrible children.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, stickers obviously was a big thing. And then markers. So then, yeah, so Craig, who now has Crank, he definitely was like we all sort of like made our own ink, which is also super crazy and like toxic. But yeah, we would make our own mops and stuff. I mean, again, it had so much to do with just like different materials and different stuff. Like we would try all different things. Like I said, we were making mops and you know, trying to like do it the old world way with like eraser, like felt, and sort of like shoe polish bottles and unis and minis and just sort of like all different things.
Super messy.
Yeah, very messy, and you know, explosions. But Craig really brought silver markers. Silver markers were amazing. Yeah, and like paint markers. So it was just a little, but again, it was also like paintbrushes, you know, we'd go out painting, like drawing with paintbrushes also, and like just like holding a bottle of ink. I remember just like walking around with like a bottle of ink and a paintbrush, like I said, and it was just sort of like whatever you had available. And like the music we were listening to, and like
would you go racking with, was it like solo missions, or would you go with like Craig? Would you go with Twist? Would you go with friends? Was it like crews of people going racking?
I never went racking with Barry ever. I mean, I don't even really know how. I mean, Craig and Barry would go, I think, together. Craig and I did. It was really with like Josh. I think Josh and I were really, really good at stealing stuff together. I mean, we were terrible together. So, but yeah, Craig and I, it was definitely like, you'd get way more shit if you went with another person, you know, because you could take literally like bags and you could like work together. So that was more so with like Craig and Josh that I was doing stuff like that. And then, I mean, if you're alone, you could only get so much, you know. But yeah, I mean, people would just like walk out of the store with stuff, you know. If you act like you're doing something, you can like get away with it. So it was just like, it was sort of like all hands on deck. But I mean, yeah, like I said, it kind of got to the point where it just was sort of annoying. Like, it was just, like at one point it was like you couldn't really like, you'd feel guilty buying something, which was sort of like insane. And it got like kind of very stressful and to some extent, because you're always sort of like sweating a little bit when you're stealing something. And it was just like causing so much like drama in your mind. And so I think I needed to sort of like step away from that quite a bit, you know what I mean? And sort of like revert back to sort of like normal life. But just because I think that just sort of like that mental state of just like always sort of like trying to scope out a scene or like feel it out and like see what's going on, and it was just became like too much energy, you know what I mean? It's like way more chill than just like buy a candy bar. But so I feel like that part, I wanted it to end at some point. But I mean, in the beginning, it was like fine. We were just like racking everything, and it was like not a big deal, you know? And, you know, no one's gonna like fucking buy their paint. You're like, you know, you won't get any props if you do that. So, I mean, there's nothing else you can do. Yeah, sort of had no choice. But it was fine, but it's definitely, it was like something I wanted to end at some point. But I mean, it was sort of like became a real lifestyle. I mean, you know, our whole lives were sort of like revolving around graph and sort of like getting away with it and sort of scoping scenes and sort of like thinking about the next spots and sort of like all of it was sort of like wrapped up in it. And I think that for me as a girl, it just sort of got like, it was like so dude driven. And I think, I mean, it was crazy because if we got rolled on as by the cops or whatever, they never, it was like, it's so like driven by stereotypes, as we know, like cops and what have you. But it's like, they never thought I was doing graph. You know what I mean? It was always like, oh, did your boyfriends drive, bring you out so they can like do their graph in front of you? And it was just like, sure, like, okay, whatever you want, dude, whatever you want to think, that's, whatever. But, yeah, but then I think that for me as a girl and like being around like dudes and like dude graph, it just sort of like also sort of like wore me down. And I mean, graph, like really hardcore graph is not the most creative thing in the world. You know what I mean? It's not like, and I think for me, like juggling wanting to be an artist, I mean, yeah, that's the whole other thing that we could talk about. It's like, yeah, Barry McGee like made a whole like career out of graph and like the work that he was doing. And for me, it was really hard for me to sort of like bridge those worlds because for me, they were so separate. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't gonna like bring my graph into like a gallery space. I just didn't know how to bridge it because for one thing, graph, like I was sort of like saying earlier, it was like graph was so much about like the people that I was hanging out with. It was like a social scene, it was a social interaction and sort of like a language that we shared. It was sort of like something that we were doing like out at night or whatever. And then like during the day I was like working in the studio like painting, and so I never like on paintings, and it was sort of like something I couldn't really bridge. And so I think that's also another reason why I kind of just sort of ended it so abruptly, because I got into graduate school for art and I wanted to sort of like be just a normal studio artist, you know what I mean? Like I wanted to be in my studio painting. And so I think it was hard for me to sort of like bridge that world, and it was sort of like pulling quite a bit in one direction and sort of like taking me somewhere that I couldn't really like bring together. And so, it was sort of like I never really wanted to like do graph in the, I mean, people nowadays, of course, like it's like, it's like so crazy. But I mean, again, it's like branding or commercializing of something that's sort of like, it's almost like unattainable or ephemeral, graph to me. It's like, I don't really know how it can be sort of like in a gallery space or what have you. So that was really hard for me to sort of bridge. But yeah, people do it really well like Barry does, yeah, it's good.
What was it like was it like probably mid 90s, late 90s, around that area in San Francisco, when you were painting? Like what were the missions like painting with Barry or painting with Craig or painting with AMAZE? Like would you guys try to not be seen by people, or was it whatever because the cops don't care? Like how was that?
Like seen by other graph writers?
Or just by
like,
just the civilians?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, there was no one really on the streets when we were doing, I mean, no one was really out, I mean, in the way, I mean, again, I mean, it's like, it was always super awkward. I mean, I would go out painting alone at times, and that was really awkward because people always thought I was a prostitute. But like, so that was sort of like annoying. But but when I went out with other people, obviously that wasn't the case. But it was, I mean, yeah, we never really were approached. But I mean, no one had any like, no one cared about anyone else, really. I mean, it was very safe. It was incredibly safe at that point. Like nothing. I mean, in San Francisco, if you went like to specific areas of San Francisco, it could be sketchier, but it was definitely, I mean, 6th and Market was always super crazy and hectic, and we were always like being chased by people with knives or something, but it wasn't really like, I mean, it definitely, felt very safe. And we were always on bikes, which is so crazy. we felt like you could get away from anything on a bike. I mean, you could go further and into different places than you could with a car. Or, I mean, the tunnels were completely empty. I mean, no one ever was in there. I don't know. It was just sort of like a free-for-all. No one, cared. I mean, it was fun. I mean, we'd always, start by drinking in a bar, and then you end up going out and, hanging on the street. So, I mean, Barry never drank, so he was never at a bar. I mean, Barry probably didn't really, like, hang out like other people did. He was a little bit more sort of straight, so to speak, and we were kind of a little bit wilder probably than he was. So, but again, he was a little bit older than us, so, which made kind of a difference, really. But, I mean, Barry was always, like, super career-minded, you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't ever going to do anything that didn't help himself, that's for sure. And I think that we were a little bit, like, who gives a fuck, We were a little bit more, like, we didn't care so much. But, Barry always was incredibly ambitious, and doing more sort of like what I said. Like, he was way more involved with, like, institutions and what have you at that point. So he had sort of like a foot in that world more so. And yeah, I just felt like sort of like a wild card. I don't know. But it was... I mean, in terms of, like, being on the street, there was no one ever there. I mean, there was other writers that you'd run into, and that was probably more of a drama than just sort of, like, pedestrians or what have you, But we never really it was all super chill. I don't know.
Yeah.
It seemed like...
What was KR like back then?
Craig's super funny. Very New York. Very, like, Craig's a very curious person. He's very sweet, but he also has, like, a really, like, he's, like, a super, like, thief also. I mean, he definitely was craftier than most people, I would say. But you wouldn't really know it because he's really, like, kind. And, I don't know, Josh and Gray, like Jonas, Josh learned a lot from Jonas, from hanging out with Gray. And then... and that was like sort of like Jonas was always had sort of like this. Jonas was really sort of pivotal in terms of sort of bridging like pop culture and graph. Like, he really sort of like brought this sort of like lo-fi element. I mean, there was a lot of like art that we were looking at, like Raymond Patamon and like Mike Kelly, and sort of like the music we were listening to, and it all sort of like in like Paul McCarthy, and there was like artists that influenced, at least for me, because we were going to art school, it was sort of like a lot of that sort of like ended up on the street to some extent, and like I said, it was not like super traditional. And like Craig was an amazing photographer, and I'm sure that people know about his photography, but I mean, everyone, like for me, I'm like waiting for his photography book to come out, like whenever that is, because Craig was, whereas like Barry was like a printmaker and like I was a painter, like Craig was a photographer. And so when we were going out at night painting, Craig always had his camera. And that's the other thing that's so crazy, is that like it was so chill in San Francisco. Craig was using like a powerful like flash and his camera while we were out. And so it just goes to show like how sort of chill, because we'd be up on rooftops with like a flash. And so, I mean, he has thousands of images of us, just like this small group of people in the small, sort of like space and time of San Francisco in the 90s, is he like documented it all.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's like an endless amount of photography. I mean, and I did also, to some extent, I would take like a Holga. I mean, also like people have to remember that like we didn't have digital photography. We only had like, film and like negatives and sort of in slides. I mean, I remember taking like slides out, like I had a lot of slides of graph and stuff like that. But I mean, it was just like all different kinds of photography, and I would use a Holga with a flash, and but Craig has like thousands of photographs of us bombing and like our whole life, and like, you know, us stealing stuff. Like I took a bunch of pictures of us, like of just like our piles of like stuff that we would steal. It was so much fun to like document all the stuff that we would steal, and sort of like the whole, like when you wake up in the morning and then when you go out at night, like it was just like all documented. Like Craig has like everything. I mean, it was just sort of like art and culture and magazines and zines and comics and underground and like the beat movement and all the artists of the Bay Area. It all like went into what we were doing. And so, I mean, I think there was just like a richness there that I don't really know. I mean, there's a richness somewhere now. I mean, it's definitely not like, you know, there's every generation has its stuff, you know what I mean? But that's what we had. And so like generations now have something else. But I mean, that was definitely like our world. We were working with like a lot of like palpable sort of like physical things, you know, like negatives and cameras and paint and different kinds of paint and wheat paste and ink and mops. And it was sort of like everything was available and everything was like okay. No one was like, I mean, I definitely got a bunch of shit for like painting horses, like no joke. It was like
Oh really?
Oh yeah, oh my God.
That's
like,
something I wanted to touch on,
that's
is
like
where
another thing.
where did the horse come from? Why that symbol?
Well, I mean, the horse came from, like, I grew up between Marin County and a town called Benicia. Like, my dad lived in a town called Benicia. My mom lived in Marin County. And so I grew up riding horses in Marin County. And, like, I was a super, like, what you call, like, a horse girl, what have you. Like, I would paint and I would draw horses all the time since I was a little girl. And so it was super familiar for me to do that on the street, I think, and sort of, like, life size also. So it was sort of something super easy that I gravitated towards. And I never felt like I was really good at like graph or like writing, or like my tags suck or whatever, you know what I mean? Like I was not super good at traditional graph anyhow. And so I just gravitated towards a horse or imagery of some kind or another. But I mean, I definitely, like, when I started writing with Craig and sort of like that whole traditional element of graph became known to me, I think I really worked hard at doing lettering and sort of like traditional graph more so, and I got a little bit better. But I mean, I never was like super great at it in my mind, but and that didn't really bother me. But I think that there was a point, at some point, I really had to like prove myself with letters and like, you know, tagging and what have you. And that was really annoying. But it was also like very much so a gender thing. Like I was a girl and I was like painting horses. But I think that, and a lot of writers were really harsh on me about that. And they're all dudes, you know what I mean? But it was like, I think I mean, that's the other reason why I was so driven to go like all city or to fucking bomb like fuck, because that was the only way that I could like get any respect from like graph writers, and that really like mattered to me. But at some point in the beginning, but then at some point I was just like, fuck that. And I kind of dropped it like around 95. I didn't really care anymore. So I sort of like reverted back to even more image-based work. Like I said, like I think in 95 I was going out way more with like paintbrushes and doing murals and sort of like illegal murals, like full-on murals with like bucket paint, and just to sort of like fuck that world, because it was just like so sort of nasty in terms of like who was a real writer. Like I really gave a shit, you know, about who was a real writer, because like traditional graph really, like our piecing was so uninteresting to me. Like I said, it was like there was no way in fucking hell I'd go to like a legal wall and fucking work all day on some bullshit. You know what I mean? Like no way. And so, I mean, I really loved bombing and I really liked tagging and what have you. It was like, you know, that's what graph was for me. And so, yeah. And so I feel like I cared about that for a hot minute in terms of like proving myself, but then I was sort of like, whatever. But also because, I mean, graph to some extent is super straight, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a straight male world, and I really did not come from that, you know? Like, again, I came from this whole like sexual freedom, you know? Like, my mom was like sexually free and woman, you know? And it was just like, I didn't really give a shit about this male centric shit, you know? And so I think that I just like did it for a minute, and then it was just like so annoying, all the shit I got about like being a girl and like doing horses. And so yeah, I like bombed a lot and like was just like fuck you, and then like wanted to just like walk away and do something else, you know what I mean? Like I just wanted to sort of like quell that talk and then just like leave it. So that was sort of like something that I wanted to do and get off my chest. But it was also, I mean, the horses, yeah, but I really like the image of a horse, you know. There was something about, I mean, it seems sort of like all American, and like this sort of like idea sort of like symbolized like freedom or like leaving or just like walking away or just sort of like fuck you or something. There was just like a little bit of something a little bit like wild card about it that I really liked, you know, in that image for sure. It definitely wasn't like a girly thing in my mind, but that I was doing, although I did sort of get like hyper femme after the whole like male scene sort of like nausea that I got. But I mean, I definitely loved like the energy of graph writers. It wasn't like I was like hating on graph writers. I just was annoyed with how like like small it was, you know, in that sort of like like straight sense. I saw it as more like open. Like, yeah, you could be like the city is your canvas, you know. It's like you could do anything out there, you know what I mean? Like I didn't want to just see like, I just wanted it more complex, I guess, in my mind. Like that's sort of like I wanted to do my little like gallery on the street, and like I just wanted like funny sort of like kooky things, you know, also. But yeah, I wanted it to be more expansive, I feel, and it was like tiresome to be around such a male-centric sort of, I mean, because yeah, it was like I was never going to be good at like traditional graph anyhow, you know what I mean? And so whatever.
I feel like the use of the symbol probably stood out a lot.
I think so. I mean, people like talk about that, like say that stuff to me, and it's like, oh wow, that's cool. That like, I mean, yeah, people really remember those horses. It's crazy, you know. It's sort of like, it's nice. I mean, I love doing them. I loved like sitting on a rooftop at night, like smoking a cigarette and like looking at the city. It was like amazing, you know. It was like fun, super fun, you know.